What's up, gamers? I'm Randy Potato with 1800 hours in Darkest Dungeon 2, sharing my top 10 tips for success. Similar to Darkest Dungeon 1, stress management is the core of Darkest Dungeon 2. In Darkest Dungeon 2, your stress meter goes from 0 to 10, with a devastating meltdown likely once you reach 10 stress. Beyond this, being at 4 or higher stress can also cause negative road and combat barks, interactions where your heroes will lose affinity, while low stress makes positive barks much more likely. There are multiple easy paths to keeping stress manageable. The easiest is to simply defeat the stress-dealing enemies as soon as possible. This will always be preferable to a reactive strategy. Learn which enemies and skills cause stress by clicking Alt on an enemy to survey their skills. This will be empty if you haven't encountered a certain skill yet. There are 2 primary stress healers in the game, Man-at-Arms and Jester, and I suggest you use one of these heroes and their stress heal skills until you have more experience handling stress. There are other heroes with stress heals, but these 2 are far and away the best. Combat items are another. Laudanum is available even on a new profile, and you should buy out the stock at any shop as a new player until you feel more comfortable handling stress. I often still buy out the laudanum stock from any shop when I see it. Another great item is mineral spring water, found at Oases by selecting the supplies option. If you scout the Oasis, most runs you should always make visiting one your priority. And finally, you can resist stress entirely with Virtuoso Path Jester, the best Jester path, Orphan Wolf Cub along with Luxury Gear, the first accessible pet in the Altar of Hope, and with Stress Resist Trinkets, available for cheap at most inns and hoarders. Second tip is managing relationships, which ties in heavily to stress. Having low stress is the easiest way to get positive affinity. Every encounter location, where your heroes have a chance to voice their opinion, will either gain or lose you affinity, so make sure to pay attention to the glow of the other heroes when you hover over a hero. It will either be gold and gain you 1 affinity with that hero if you select this option, or it will be blue and you will lose 2 affinity with that hero. Some options won't have a glow and therefore won't affect affinity. In almost all cases, I take the option that gives me the most possible affinity without going into the negative affinity threshold, which is 8, even if I want to pick another option. Always make sure to check your affinity before making a selection here by pressing R to open the relationship screen. In items are another easy way to gain affinity. A very important note is that at N1 you have a minus 20% chance to get a relationship of any kind. This means it's impossible to get a relationship if you're in the neutral zone. Since everyone starts at 9 affinity, just above the negative zone, and too far away to realistically make it to 14 affinity for a positive relationship before you get your relationship rolls at the embark screen, the only thing you should be doing at N1 is avoiding falling into the negative zone. This means do not use any RNG affinity item, like the playing cards, at the first inn. Save it for the next region. Getting a negative relationship this early is devastating for a run. In combat, you can gain affinity by performing certain actions, moving, attacking an enemy the direct turn after another hero attacked the same enemy, or attacking an enemy the direct turn after it attacked another hero, along with using buffs, including items, and especially heals can gain affinity, usually based on stress level. Beware the blue triangle above the hero's HP bar when preparing to use a skill or item. It signals that doing that action will decrease affinity instead. Third, take the time to plan ahead in all phases. Obviously, with a fresh profile, going in blind, you aren't going to know what's coming and can't make a long-term plan. But once you have some experience, you want to take a step back and think before you act. I make sure to set a plan at every juncture in the run. At the crossroads, I have an idea of what sort of build I want, what lair boss is easiest to defeat for my team, and what trophies, trinkets, and items I want to have going into the final boss, and how to achieve all those goals. I make similar plans for smaller goals, such as how to maximize my relationships at each individual inn, and at the start of every region I plot out a path to maximize my chance of winning, rather than just randomly drift around the map, as well as taking a second to pause at the start of every combat to draft a plan of attack. Even with a lack of knowledge, getting used to taking the time to think through your actions and cultivate a plan, even if it's terrible, will help you in the long run. Fourth tip is on combat items. I often see other players, and myself honestly, throwing out combat items because they seem to be useless. Even for the combat items that straight up have no use, there is still a benefit to equipping and using them over throwing them out. A combat item that targets an enemy is an easy way to remove dodge from an opponent, even if the actual effect of the item seems irrelevant. In addition, any item that you can use to buff another hero gives you a chance of earning affinity. So early game, equip and use items you deem weaker, while saving quality combat items, generally your heals, along with blinds and stuns, and otherworldly fragments, for the toughest fights. For team building, ideally you want one tank, a high HP hero who can gain self-taunt to absorb the most difficult blows. Man-at-Arms is best at this, but Leper and Hellion are also pretty good in this role. You also want a stress healer, the best of which are Man-at-Arms and Jester. And finally, you should always bring a healer, with Plague Doctor being far and away the most reliable, though Vestal and Flagellant are also very strong. And a Cultist exists. Round out your team with some damage and you're well on your way to a win. Sixth, it's best if you pretend that Deathblow Resistance just doesn't exist for your heroes. Unlike other stats where it's more of an annoyance if you lose an RNG roll, missing a DBR check just means you're dead, and run is usually over. I mostly ignore this stat altogether, prioritizing heals and dot resistances to save yourself. With this strategy, the trophy Bumper Crop becomes the strongest in the game, giving you max HP in exchange for DBR, which is much more reliable since percentage-based healing makes max HP among the strongest stats in the game. Seventh tip, make sure to regularly use Alt View in combat. If you press Alt over an enemy, you will get a closer look at it and its stats. If an enemy is ordained, this is where you can figure out exactly what the ordainment buff does, as it changes based on which act you are playing. Also, once you have seen an enemy's specific skill, that skill will be available to view in the Alt View menu, including positional restrictions which make it easier to plan your attack. Eighth tip, actually read the in-game tutorials thoroughly. They are very well done and a lot of basic mechanics get passed over by people either reading too quickly or just not reading at all. There are a lot of mechanics to remember in this game, and the tutorial is quite thorough, so quick skimming through the tutorial a few extra times, especially if you have taken a break from Darkest Dungeon 2, is recommended. Not that I don't appreciate or won't answer basic questions, because I will, but I definitely respect a player more who has done the bare minimum to improve themselves. Ninth tip is to have fun. This might be a bit corny, but it's legitimate advice. In a game as complex as this, with this many moving parts, there are a lot of ways to win. The best way to grow as a player is to experiment with different comps and strategies, even if they aren't meta or even good, as this will expand your overall game knowledge and allow you to handle a larger number of scenarios in your tougher runs. And finally, the most important tip is to sub to me, Randy Potato. I post new Darkest Dungeon 2 content every day. Also, you can become a YouTube member or sub to my Patreon in the description to get early access to my upcoming videos, including a number of Darkest Dungeon 2 guides. Thank you for watching.